Hopefully we'll get to the laughing bit, yeah? Hi.
I don't know if I understood well, but you started by saying that nature is the word which in English has the most numerous meaning, the most polysemic, is it right? Can you point us some of these meanings? And also because I was told that in French, this word is the word sens. So, and so I was wondering if you think this applies to... I'm interested to hear what the different meaning of nature in English, to see if in French it's not the same number of meaning.
Well, if I'm sort of slightly right, whatever term we use for nature, if we're sort of in kind of whatever Western civilization is, it's going to have a lot of resonances to it, because this is an artifact of a very, very long process that we've forgotten is a process, because it keeps on running in the background like a sort of operating system, right? So the idea of nature is sort of like an operating system on your phone or on your computer. It just sort of functions, right? And then you can kind of do stuff with it, right? And so this concept gets sort of everywhere. Now, right this minute, right now, I'm somewhat embarrassingly unable to find in the supposedly intelligent brain that I have a lot of examples of variegated uses of this word, but hopefully, as I get intense and excited and crank my brain into gear, I can actually do it. You know, but for example, thank God, good one, Tim. Like if you look on a product in the supermarket in England or wherever, like America or wherever, you see the word natural quite a lot, right? And the word natural doesn't mean anything. Right, it's why they use it. Right, so the natural ingredient, it doesn't mean organic, right? It doesn't mean it could mean artificial, but they just decided to say natural to make it sort of sound good, somehow, right? And so it's a totally bland kind of vanilla word that you can put into anything, kind of thing, yeah. Like American mustard, you know. Who actually likes that stuff, you know? Do even Americans like it? You know, like, do Americans like the way that they enjoy themselves? I'm American, so I can diss myself, yeah? You can tell, can't you, because of my accent? Yeah? It's my souvenir accent. Actually, of course, I have dual, yeah? Which one do I go back to if, you know, Trump or Brexit? Which one? Help me, please, somebody. Asylum, come, please.
Hello. You emphasize hello. Thank you for your lecture.
My pleasure.
You emphasized in the subtext of this lecture a sort of a critique of anthropocentrism with human and non-human. And I'm familiar with a little bit of your other work where if you escalate that concept, it's just as polemic to be against living and non-living. And so for the concept of nature, it seemed to sort of resuscitate our ambivalence to the non-human world, but that is also kind of escalating an ambivalence to the non-living world.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm actually writing a book for. Do you know this press Verso? Yeah, they're like the New Left press. Perry Anderson created in the '60s, right? Sort of Zizek and people like that do stuff with Verso. And they asked me to write a book about ecology because they realised there was this gap in the way they talk about stuff. Yeah, and precisely the issue is, can you modify or expand Marxist theory and other kinds of left-wing theory to include non-human beings? And in this book, I'm arguing that yes, you can, but like, you're not going to like it. Like, a lot of like Marxist scholars are going to think it's really whack, you know, what this is. Because in order to accommodate polar bears, you also have to be able to accommodate dancing tables. You remember in Capital Volume 1, Marx says that like how capitalism operates is weirder than if a table actually did telekinese. You know, like if it actually did move around all by itself. This kind of weird spectral table that has its own kind of what some people now call agency, which is kind of like American mustard, actually. I'm not quite sure. It sort of gets in everywhere. Not really keen on this word agency, but whatever. Something like that needs to be, you know, part of the mix here. You know, what does it mean when you come to think about animals, quote unquote, this way? I also hate the word animal. Animal is also American mustard. non-human beings, right? Living life forms, yeah? Well, just think about evolution, right? Like, if you stop the tape of evolution at any point, you're always going to find some kind of life form that's like a member of a certain species, right? But this life form has a certain kind of weird power to it. You know, like the X-Men, it has some kind of X power, right? So there's like a fish, right? But it's like an X fish because it can breathe out of water for 5 seconds, right? Now, that's how evolution works, right? Like the fact that it's not just a fish, but it's a fish with a kind of spectral X-fish sort of haunting it, is how you get evolution to flop like a slinky, because it's not progress really, into like amphibians or whatever, yeah? So there's a certain kind of what some people will call spectrality happening in evolution, right? Like there's another way of doing this, which is to say there's nothing mysterious in the world at all. Everything's just made of little bits, right? Like you can go the other way and you can say, well, yeah, life forms are the same as non-life forms because really life is bogus because really everything's made of dead bits, right? Like, how's that been working out as a way of like caring for, you know, ourselves, let alone non-human beings, right? Like I violently resist this concept, if only because it seems to be very, you know, like a good excuse for doing violent stuff, you know, but also I think it's incorrect. But luckily, because I don't want to spend 5 hours explaining why, you just have to believe me right now. So, like, in order to allow for non-human beings that are alive, we have to enter a thought space that's a little bit sort of magical, paranormal, animistic, right? Like Yoda. We have to become Yoda a little bit. And the whole thing is that for the last 200 years, a lot of Western philosophy has really literally been about, like, saying, I am not Yoda, like a homophobic person saying they're not gay, but actually they sort of are inside, right? Like, because religion slightly melted in the 1700s, yeah, and out came Mesmer, right, and his idea of animal magnetism, right? Now, this idea is exactly the force, right? Like, the agri-logistical social space went blah, 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 a little bit, and religion kind of, for, at least for certain groups of people, slightly collapsed a little bit, and the kind of esoteric, weird stuff that it was kind of holding on to, which in essence, in the end, is the paranormal, started to leak out, right? Now, animal magnetism literally is like everything that Yoda says, right? Like Obi-Wan, you know, it's an energy field that surrounds and penetrates life forms and blah, 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 right? Now, ever since Kant, all philosophers, including Freud and people like that, have been basically trying to, like, cover over this concept, yeah? But it's the only reason, when you analyze it, and I'm not going to do it now because, again, it's a bit boring. Like, actually, it's not boring, but it's a bit like of a digression, yeah? It's the only reason their philosophy actually works at all, is because they always include a little tiny special droplet of this paranormal stuff, right? So I'm trying to, like, turn up the volume on this fader of the paranormal that they've all been trying to keep down towards zero, like ever so quietly, sort of, you know, I'm not Yoda, I'm Kant. I'm a very sensible person. I don't believe in a universal force that surrounds and penetrates everything, that causes action at a distance in a telekinetic way. That would be absurd. You know, but like it becomes less and less possible to believe that causality is about, like, things mechanically pushing, right? And so if it's not about that, then it's definitely about non-local, like, stuff that doesn't have to touch, right? And, like, if you're an artist, you call this the aesthetic dimension, right? Like art is how causality works, actually. That's sort of more like it, you know? Like, visualize right now your favorite painting, yeah? You just got influenced by something that isn't here, causally touched, affected by something that isn't actually, like, here that I can point to. Right, that's what I'm talking about, yeah. That a little bit. That's like that's a bit Yoda, yeah. And people like me should try harder to sound more like Yoda, you know. More like Yoda, they should try to sound. Hello.
If we think of this interconnected mesh or whatever you call it, how would you reflect on the role of a designer, a landscape, urban, regional designer, how to interfere with this reality or with this energetic? Because it's not about creating harmony, I think.
Yeah,
it's
right
about.
on.
So I was just wondering if you could give some reflections on
Yeah,
that.
well, that is the question, isn't it? That is the political question, because all of a sudden, I've taken away the normal, like, modern reason why we do things, like, which is to have like a fairly nice sounding explanation of reality, and then you act on it, right? Like, oh, thank God his explanation's a little bit left-wing, so that allows me to do left-wing stuff. Or, oh, thank God his explanation's a bit right-wing, because I'm a bit of a fascist, and it allows me to do right-wing stuff, or something like that. And the point about this flat ontology thing is it takes that away from you, right? And it's a little bit like anarchism, yeah? Because what it's saying is, you've got the controls, yeah? You can decide right now who you're going to affiliate with, right? Like, for example, we all decided for some reason to affiliate with trees and leaves and this plastic luminous thing. I mean, that's design, right? Like, it's basically a kind of a political association of beings, right? And this association's never going to be complete, right? Like, the point about interconnectedness is that it's a jigsaw puzzle that always has one piece missing, yeah? You know, like Lego, you know, because, like, if you have Lego in your house, there's always a bit of the Lego that you wish you could find that's like the best, the crucial bit that's going to make the, you know, Yoda's, like, planet look good or whatever. Like, you've lost it somewhere, and then you step on it and it really, really hurts, you know. And, like, the Lego pieces have all got those little points on them, and they always could include another piece. You could always snap another piece on, right? It's a bit like that, right? And so the point is, there's some kind of, there's always violence in any ethical political system, right? But you've relocated where it is, right? Instead of it being this kind of top-down thing, it's more like a kind of bottom-up thing. Because the problem is, if, like the people organising this thing, they've quite sensibly provided bug spray to help us cope with the mosquitoes, we've made a political decision there, right? That we're going to slightly exclude mosquitoes from this, right? That's a political move, right? I'm terribly sorry, mosquitoes. This time, you don't get to be part of this group, right? Like, but maybe next week, some other guy shows up and they do some other thing which does involve the mosquitoes. And this is the other beautiful thing, right? Which is that ontologically things are fragile. Ontologically things are impermanent. It's not just that they happen to collapse at some point. It's that they have this collapse-y quality as a reason for why they exist, right? And so there can never be a political format to rule them all, right? There can never be one big one-size-fits-all umbrella. And we've been sort of trying that for like thousands and thousands of years, namely white Western patriarchy, right, has been trying that for thousands of years. It's sort of like hasn't worked, so let's do something different. So how many times do you have to try it before you realise it's not gonna work, right? So so design, it is politics in a way, and also is directly is philosophy, right? Because philosophy is also about like gathering number of beings together and sort of associating them together. And philosophy is design. I think there's a very strong link between politics, philosophy and design, right? So like the good and bad news is that you've got the controls and you don't need anybody like me telling you why to do something because this is more real than that, right? That's what most philosophers do, right? That's the ontotheology, is when they say, you know, everything's kind of real, but atoms are more real than everything else, right? Or everything's kind of real, but universal processes are more real than everything else. So everything's kind of real, but like human economic relations get to decide what's the most real about everything, right? All of that stuff is ontotheology, yeah? And that's what you sort of can't do anymore, because we've just realized that it's just like this big old retweet of agricultural religion, you know, and like agricultural religion is how agricultural society explains itself and maintains itself. So if you keep doing it, you're just going to be perpetuating it. So you have to sort of stop it, yeah? I could go on. Well, so like, okay, so here's a great analogy, yeah? In Buddhism, there's a bodhisattva called Avalokiteshvara, right? And she or he, because somehow she or he's a bit transgender, is responsible for compassion. Somehow they're the bodhisattva of compassion. And the legend is that Avalokiteshvara was trying to save all sentient beings, all of them, right? Every single one in the universe. And she or he got very, very far, but like 20 were left or something like that couldn't be saved. So he or she got very frustrated and tried again, and, this time got to like 99%, 99.99%, right? And then still there were some beings left over. Damn it, right? So try again, and still there's a couple of beings still left over. And at that point, Avalokiteshvara's head exploded into like 1,000 heads, right? And like her eyes, like she's now got thousands and thousands of eyes, so she can see everywhere in the whole universe, right? But she can't save everything all at once. But that's what compassion feels like, right? Like, compassion is this feeling of, I wish I could do more, I wish I could save more, right? Like, somehow, the analogy they use in nunneries and monasteries in Nepal and Tibet is like a woman who doesn't have arms or legs, and she's watching her baby drowning, and she can't do anything about it, right? Like, that's a crucial part of compassion, is that it can't is this feeling that you can't fix everything. This fantasy that you could fix everything is what causes like World War IV. Yeah? This is so magic.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy.
Hi.
Super interesting, not only the lecture, but this conversation.
My pleasure.
I have been reading a lot about object-oriented ontology, and there is a lot of criticism as well, because OOO criticize the anthropocentric view of the world and give the same value to different objects and entities. But this anthropocentric view of the world is something that is very Western oriented, let's say, because there are a lot of indigenous cultures, the Aboriginal cultures in Australia, for example, that doesn't have this anthropocentric relationship with nature, with objects. And all the philosophy that gives the basis to this, since Kant, Lacan, etc., are also from the Western countries.
Right on.
So the criticism is about a colonial attitude.
Totally.
So can you elaborate a little bit on this? If
Totally.
you have research on these cultures and this relationship of other philosophies, let's say.
Oh God, yeah, I would so love to do that actually, because it's a big old political dilemma, right? Because the dilemma for me is, because I'm a white Western male, whatever, do I have to cleave to the sorts of things that explain falsely why I'm supposed to be the top, right? Like, why do I have to do that for the rest of my life, right? Now the question then becomes, am I going to just appropriate somebody else's culture? Absolutely not, right? That's the sort of the thing that you can't do. That would be horrible, right? So the point is, you have to find, like, it's a little bit like in 2001 when Dave goes into the computer. He goes into HAL 9000, right? And he takes out some of the tapes to kind of take apart the computer from the inside. I think that's more honest to do it that way, right? That I'm in Western white whatever culture, and my job is to take it apart from the inside, right? So that it can't function at all ever again, right? Yeah, correct, right? And so the point is, like, that's better than me like trying to like pretend that I'm from Western Australia or whatever, Now there's another problem though, which is that often the way, not you, but like the way this critique is sometimes staged is kind of like, it's got some kind of cynical reason flavour to it about like seeing through other people's hypocrisy, right? Like, and that's been like the top way of being right. And that is also a Western thing. It's like the top way of being right for 200 years in the West has been, I can see through your transparent attempt to look good, and it's obviously a crock of shit, therefore I'm more intelligent than you, right? And it's like this game that we like to play, and it's a kind of a Pacman game, right? So you not you, but one, Pacman's somebody else's hypocrisy, and then some bigger Pacman comes along, boom, does a Pacman on you, and you're like, oh, really paranoid, and it's called being a humanities scholar. in 2016, and you have to wear black. You have to wear this black uniform because you know for sure that you don't believe anything, which is like the most dangerous possible position to be in. You know, it's like you're an intellectual nuclear bomb waiting to explode. Like, it would be so much easier to talk to you if you, not you, but me, if I, like I do, acknowledge that I actually do have beliefs and shit, right? And these guys like walk around like stagehands, like behind the scenes, kind of cynically seeing through everything all the time, and they're playing this game of one-upsmanship on each other, right? And so the trouble is, I don't want to do that, right? And so what I sound like much more is this horrible, horrible thing to the black-wearing cool kids, which is the hippie, right? Like, in the 60s, why did the New Left not talk about ecology? Because it was a hippie thing. That's what New Left writers have told me, like people who've written for New Left Review from that time. So, oh, well, that was a hippie thing, right? And the hippie is sort of appropriating the other's culture, right, trying to look like Native American or whatever, and that's really, really not only bad, but even worse from the black-wearing cool kids' point of view. It's desperately uncool, right? It's much worse. It's like a horrible sin, you know, to be into like love and peace and crystals. And I'm not one of those people who actually tries to like themselves. Yeah. You know, like this kind of big thing about Buddhism, that it's really narcissistic. You know, so what's funny about telling people that they're narcissistic is that that's a really narcissistic thing to do, right? Like, he's there. Like, he is narcissistic. You are a bit self-absorbed, but I am wonderfully self-transparently critical of everything that I do, and that is narcissism, right? But it's sort of like upside down self-hating, right? So my idea is, why not actually like introduce some kind of like self-caring, self-loving kind of feedback loop into yourself, right? Like, and so, you know, as opposed to this idea like, I'm not one of those awful Buddhists that Zizek hates, I'm like a cool kosher one that hates himself, you know, like, what's that all about? You know, I'm not one of these awful Western people who's trying to be a nice guy. Yeah. You know, do you see the dilemma there? Right. So it's a dilemma, and it's a political problem, right? And so and tactics are always wrong at some point, right? And my tactic, which is obviously wrong at some point, is to try to take it apart from the inside permanently, right? And so the point is, I have to go right in there and do it on its own terms, and I can disarm the bomb. You know, that's the mission I'm on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But what about borderline identities?
Borderline identities?
Like what if you're not just a white male, but you're half white, half something?
Can someone put the mic? This is very important.
Yeah.
So that was true in the 60s and the 70s, but
Maybe.
Today we live in a more and more globalized world, and our identity are no longer just white male.
Correct. So this is the point, right? Like, in the end, everyone's some kind of hybrid, right? In the end, there's no sort of black and white, right? There's just like many, many shades of grey, many more than 50, right? And so the point is, now we sort of know that, right? But like, when I say that, again, like a lot of, you know, scholarship is about policing these very rigid boundaries, actually. Even the scholarship that's about dismantling them has some kind of rigid boundaryism going on in it, such that when I open my mouth, the stuff that comes out sounds really sort of wrong and hippie to some people, you know. But that's okay, I don't mind. I don't mind like being seen as like humiliatingly as a bit of a fool. You know, I'm not afraid to be a fool. So I completely agree with you, yeah. So the whole idea, like, is that it was never the case that we were identical to ourselves. That's just like that in itself is a patriarchal construct right there. You know, like even a fish isn't just a fish. Like a fish has like a superpower, right? Like in order to be a fish. Right, it has to be, like, I'm not Tim all the way through. There's all this stuff in here that isn't Tim, right? You know this thing called Brighton Rock? It's this minty tube of sugary goodness that you can get in South England, yeah? And it's pink on the outside and white on the inside, and it has a little phrase going through it, like Brighton Rock, or This is a present from Brighton. Now you can get insult rock that has fuck you in it. So you sort of suck. It's a fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, all the way down. The point is that nobody, or this thing here, you there, leaf, tree, human being, none of these entities have got that kind of Intel Inside copyright stamp going all the way through them. Like, this is a Tim Morton sentence coming out of Tim Morton lips, made of Tim Morton cells, copyrighted by Tim Morton. Right? It's not correct. Right? And so the funny paradox is that, like, in order to be Tim has to have all kinds of things that are not Tim about him. In fact, for example, there's much more non-Tim DNA in here than there is Tim DNA in order for Tim to, like, say this sentence, right? And so, like, logic, certain types of logic don't work anymore. But the good news is within logic, you can tweak the logic. You can go inside the logic computer and you can allow some things to be contradictory and true at the same time and perfectly logical. You can do that, yeah? And I can prove it if you've got 5 hours, but I won't.
I appreciated the anachronology of your lecture, also pinpointing certain moments that were really crucial, that brought us to where we are now.
Hey, thanks. Yeah.
If we think a little bit into the future, also in light of the program later on in this week, Donna Haraway has a theory of the Cthulhu scene, basically.
Oh yeah.
A more sort of science fiction take on it, where
right
symbiosis actually is accelerated, or one could say also offers different opportunities in that.
Yeah.
And changes also that idea of the natural and nature. Do you have any position on that?
Yes.
Would you like to share it with us?
70% of it. I'll try not to say the 30% because I'm friends with Donna, yeah, and so we have this argument actually, and Cthulhu is this being that's become very exciting in some forms of speculative realist philosophy. I'm not excited by Cthulhu, actually. I don't know whether Donna knows very much about the history of the appropriation of Cthulhu in speculative realism, but that for sure is why she's using the term, right? And I'll get to what she thinks about it in a minute, but first of all, I'd just like to say that from my personal point of view, Cthulhu is the ultimate boy threat display concept, right, that I never want to use, because it's basically like, my God is even worse than your, like, my idea of God is even worse than yours. Like, it's like a sort of upside-down masochistic version of, like, my God's bigger and more powerful than yours. You wouldn't believe how fucked up things are. Things are so fucked up that, I mean, your version of fucked up is nowhere near as dark as my version of fucked up, so I'm cleverer than you and I'm stronger than you. Like, most, like, philosophy, like, classes and stuff like that should really be called, like, early 20-something male threat display training, right? And, like, I studied literature, so luckily I got to avoid it. You know what I mean? And, like, sort of study it a little bit sideways kind of thing, so I don't really go into that, you know? But, like, so that's my sense of Cthulhu. It doesn't work, because Cthulhu is another agricultural religion concept disguised, yeah? And I really do think there really is a thing that, you know, like, let's trust the geology people. Let's not try to put, like, concepts on it based on humanistic scholarship. Let's actually, for once in a while, because the trouble is there's this horrible asymmetry in the academy right now, right? There are these scientisty people, and then there's scientism, which is like this kind of religion of science where you believe stuff that science says is like a statement about reality, which it isn't. It's just patterns in data, yeah? And then there's this sort of self-lacerating humanistic stuff that's very, very impenetrable and kind of isolated and stuff like that, and very smug. You know, like, when I had a green card in America, before I became an American citizen, I had a green card. And what I didn't like about having a green card was what I don't like about being a modern humanities scholar, which is that you're both very powerless and very smug at the same time, and for the same reason. Like, because you can't vote, you aren't actually responsible for the horrible, stupid wrongness, right? And so you can feel very smug and totally powerless, right? It's better to be, like, more playing with hypocritical somehow. Okay, so that's the basic headline. I don't want to use this word Cthulhu scene. I want to say Anthropocene, because that's what the geology people say, yeah? And then the other thing is that Donna thinks it somehow means, like, things are interconnected. I think she talks about the tentacles kind of connecting everything, or something like that. Yeah. Cthulhu doesn't really mean that. Cthulhu means you're dead. You're already dead. You are going to be killed imminently, right? It doesn't mean anything cool about things being interconnected, you know. And so, like, it's a bit of a misreading of that whole appropriation of H.P. Lovecraft's story, yeah. And so, yeah, I'm not into it. Sorry.
Okay, maybe we have a very last question.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I think in the beginning you said you're a OOO practitioner,
Mm.
and I was just wondering if we could like maybe bring the conversation to like a very mundane level of daily life, and like how you practice flatness, how you practice horizontality.
Mm-hmm. Well.
And also just
yeah.
not really related, but I was wondering if you have some kind of affinities to Eduardo Viveros de Castro's thoughts on like perspectivism.
Gosh,
and
I
kind
wish
of
I
like a
did.
reverse anthropocentrism. And
Yeah,
stuff.
lots of people have told me I should investigate, and I haven't. So I apologise that I don't know.
No problem.
But I would like to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really awesome, because the whole thing is like, wouldn't it be good if the things that you thought were like functional in your world somehow, or maybe they were like byproducts of your world a little bit. Like they weren't just like cute ideas that got you like published or whatever, but they were actually like things that were great, that you really loved, you know. And like that's something like that is happening to me with the object-oriented ontology, and I'll give you an example of it. So I'm a meditator. Yeah, I meditate, right? And whatever that means. And but what it basically means is like learning that your experience isn't you. Like if you were going to translate Buddhism into like European American language, it would be maybe like experience does not have a you like timestamp on it everywhere, right? It's because the point of meditating is to let experience happen, right, without like grasping onto it or pushing it, right? And after a while you learn that experience is an entity that isn't you, it's autonomous from you. It's an OOO object. Object just means entity that has its own kind of existence from its own side, right? It's almost like the opposite of objectified, funnily enough. The word object is like a weird mirror in which people see all kinds of reflections, and one of the reflections they see in the mirror is like the worst possible thing that could happen to somebody, because we have this amazing like active-passive binary, this horror of passivity that comes from that, right? And we think object means that because that's how we treat non-human beings. You know what I mean? And so that, for example, would be one way in which, you know, because it's also like thoughts are entities that aren't you, right? Like we all do Twitter or whatever now. Now we sort of know that like a thought is more like a tweet, right? It's not a symptom of a brain. It's not a symptom of you. It's actually got it's got its own sort of independent reality, like a meme or a tweet or something like that, right? It has its own sort of existence, right? And so like when you meditate, you find this out, right? You find this amazing thing out, right? And you start like to look directly at the thing that's looking, right? Whatever that is. Like in the manual, it's called mind, but I don't think you don't have to call it that if you don't want to. And when you do that, it sort of weirdly disappears, you know. And that's another thing that OOO is saying. It's like when you're like caught in your stuff, doing your stuff, the stuff kind of disappears. And the reason why it disappears is because you're on your, you know, you're into what you're doing, you know. The deep reason why that can happen is this thing that one of us calls withdrawal. And I say open. So Graham Harman says withdraw, but I think maybe people think that means physically in space shrinking back. But it doesn't actually mean that. I think it's better maybe, it depends what works for you, but what works for me is this word open. Things are open, right? Tim is open, tree is open, The planet is open, grass is open, yeah. That's one way.
Okay. Well, thanks so much.